I am so honored to have Michael Ruskin on the podcast today. He has an amazing story to share with us. So I'd like to welcome Michael and have this enjoyable and deep conversation with Michael. So welcome.
Thank you, Shelley. I appreciate it. And I'm thanking for being in front of your audience.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much.
Now, you had mentioned, so go ahead and tell us a little bit about your background and where your life has come from and started.
Okay, so I'm originally from Brooklyn, New York, and I lived there for about 5-6 years before I moved to New Jersey. And I grew up along the Jersey Shore, central New Jersey.
Okay.
A lot of fun times back in the 50s and 60s. I went to college in Ohio. I went to Kent State University. I got a Bachelor of Arts degree in political science and psychology. My background is in human resources.
Okay.
I have a consulting company. I do a lot in management training and technical recruiting. And I've been doing that for about 35, almost 40 years. And I'm only doing that now part-time because my mission now is to get my parents' story out. And I'm also writing people's memoirs.
Oh, wow.
So
Okay.
people out in your audience, if you're interested in having your memoir done or you're interested in your family story be put in a book, we do that.
Okay. Excellent.
So I'm dealing in a lot of different areas, but my main goal is to keep my parents' legacy alive. That's the main point of my book. But anyway, so
and that's a beautiful mission. That's a beautiful mission.
Oh, it really is.
And as we get into that, we'll be talking about that. But it makes me think of family history. I'm big into family history and of how, you know, as we study their lives and get to know through the pictures or just research we do to help keep them alive, right? And keep their stories going is so important because it's part of us. It's not just their life. Their life has also impacts us as well. So
there's a lot of people out there like my parents and veterans, people who were in the war. They rarely spoke about their past to their children, especially people who've gone through a lot of trauma.
Yeah.
If there were veterans, they were soldiers in the military or survivors. They don't really talk about it. They just want to put into their past. And
yeah,
so,
because it was so traumatic for them.
Exactly.
They don't want someone else to have to experience that through their words, probably.
Right. That's right. So I really didn't press the issue as a child. I knew my mom had a daughter, and I didn't really go into a lot of what happened, because it would bring up a lot of the bad memories and open up wounds. So I didn't really go there.
So was she a sister to you, or is she from a different marriage?
No. She was my sister. She was born in 1940, and she died before she was 4 years old by the Germans. She was taken away by the Nazis.
Wow. So let's just go ahead and get into that story of your parents. And can you go ahead and start where you want? Yeah.
Okay. So let me first of all tell you how this book came about, because the book came about, it's almost as interesting as the story.
Mm-hmm.
In 1993, my father passed away in Miami Beach. He had a long illness. And after my brother and I flew down from New York, we went, obviously we had arrangements for the funeral. After about 2 weeks, we both decided we were going to sell the condo that my mom and dad were living in. My mom at the time was in a nursing home. She developed Alzheimer's.
Okay.
So my brother and I decided we were going to go ahead and sell the condo. So one night I went over there, still being in Miami, and I started cleaning out, putting the condo in placement. The real estate broker was coming over the next day. And I went into his bedroom to start straightening up his bedroom. And I went into his night table. And at the bottom of the night table, I found a manila folder. And in there were documents that were written up by the doctors and the lawyers. They were writing testimony to help my parents for reparations they were getting from the German government in 1964.
Wow.
So my parents had to recount their whole experience as testimony to the doctors, to the lawyers, and all the documents I have are both in German and in English, and they're in the back of my book.
Wow.
So here I am, 11 o'clock at night, sitting on my father's bed, reading over these documents, and I didn't know hardly anything about what was happened to them back during the war. They were recounting their experiences in the Kovna ghetto, which is in Lithuania. My parents are Holocaust survivors from Lithuania, where, by the way, 97% of the Lithuanian Jews were exterminated by the Nazis between 1941 and 1945.
Wow.
So when you think about 150,000 Jews who perished in 4 years in Lithuania, and only about less than 5,000 survived, 2 of those were my parents. You have to say they were a miracle couple. It would have been
Yes.
incredible just to have one of them live, but both of them lived. So
Yeah.
here I am sitting, reading these documents about what happened to my father, what happened to my mother, the physical and emotional condition they were in after the war. All this was written out by the attorneys, and then they petitioned the German courts in 1964 for reparations, the loss of their families and my sister. And then they ended up getting reparations for the remainder of their lives. So it was an incredible experience because I didn't know that much. In 1993, here I am getting ready to get this condo on the market, and I'm reading these documents. It was just mind-blowing. And of course, it was shocking, and it took me a long time to digest everything that I was reading. It was really a hard time for me. So
I
a lot
bet.
of the information that I got is now in the book, and it's also, the documents are in the back of the book.
That's incredible. And yeah, almost like surreal to probably be reading it and not even realize all this that your parents went through when you're.
I'll tell you, Sean, as I was growing up, I would be sitting in the den watching TV. The German, they had a show called a World at War. They showed the Germans footage taking the Jews into the camps or grabbing them off the street, sitting next to my parents. And I couldn't connect these two with what I was watching on the screen.
Right.
My parents both were there, but I was a kid in the 50s, early 60s. I was like an American. I just wanted to go out and play baseball and have all this, and they never really spoke about it. It was only later that I realized how special these people were. And to me, I call them my heroes. They were the miracle couple.
Yeah.
Because the fact that they went through so much and they spoke so little about what happened to them was shocking that anybody could do that. Because as we go further into this, you'll see what my mom and my dad went through was incredible, totally incredible.
Yeah. So they were in Lithuania. They were born there and they grew up there. And okay.
Right. So what happened? Yeah, my mom and dad came from Lithuania. That's very close to where the Ukraine. It's near Ukraine. It's all that's going on there now.
Right.
They lived about an hour apart. My mother was one of 9 children. She was the 3rd oldest, and she ended up becoming a school teacher. And she ended up going to Kaunas, which is the capital city of Lithuania back then, to also go to a teacher's college and start teaching. My father came from the town of Kazan, which is about an hour away, and he became an electrician. And he also moved to Kaunas, but they didn't know each other until my father took an apartment in the same building as my mother and my aunt, where they lived together. And my aunt introduced them in 1938.
Okay.
And so my aunt brought them together and they courted, and then they got married in 1939. And by the way, my grandfather was a rabbi. My mom's dad was pretty conservative rabbi, 9 children. They lived on a farm. They raised different types of livestock and crops, and they were very active in the community. He was running a temple, a shul there, a synagogue. So he had a really big following in his congregation. He was very well known. Of course, they were all exterminated later on. But so my mother came from a rather affluent family. My father, on the other hand, came from a rather poor family. They lived in a 2-bedroom apartment on the top floor of where their store was. My father was in it was a haberdashery store. They made gloves and scarves and different types of accessories that women and men would wear. And so they ran the store. My dad ended up going to a local vocational school to become an electrician. And then my grandfather on my father's side passed away, and then my grandmother actually ran the store with my aunt. And my dad helped out at the store, but his real love was electronics, electricity. And so he then ended up going to Kaunas to become an electrician, and that's where my dad and my mom met. So
Okay.
in 1939, they got married in Kaunas. My grandfather presided over the wedding. He was a rabbi.
Uh-huh.
And in 1940, my sister Rose Miriam was born in Kaunas, Lithuania.
Okay.
So that's how they got together.
That's
So
neat.
then,
That's
go ahead.
yeah, they were, just there's no chance in meetings, right? I think there's no coincidences.
No, and in my book, I say that they were destined to meet each other. They were just
Yeah.
destined to meet. And the fact that it was such a miraculous story because my book is basically a contrast between the light and the darkness, between the light of the strength of the human spirit. It's a spiritual book. The strength of the human spirit, the love they had for each other, the courage, the perseverance, their faith against a man who was an evil person, Adolf Hitler, destruction, evil, death, the darkness. It was that comparison. Also, the fact that my mother and father really showed a lot of courage at a time where very few people did, and they had a lot of faith. And there was also the contrast between the American allies, which is another big part of my book, how they were liberated. The American allies, the partisans, the people who liberated a continent versus the Nazis and the Third Reich who wanted to destroy mankind primarily. They just wanted to have their own, what they call the Aryan race. They wanted to show that they were the superior race. And to them, they had to eliminate a lot of the people who they thought were inferior to them, which included a lot of people, the Jews, the Catholics, the gays, a lot of different ones, the minorities. And so I made that contrast between the two, which is also a big part of the book.
Yeah. And I think that, those who are in the darkness, who are evil like that, they can't see past themselves, right? There's no light I don't know, the focus is on themselves. And that's why I think it's important to take the focus off ourselves and have that faith, like you were saying, and that foundation that really helped your parents. So take us through, if you can, your parents met and what was the experience with all this evil coming into the world at that time?
Okay, so it was now 1941. The Nazis rolled over Poland, Czechoslovakia, Austria. Their mission was to actually take over the land and then give the land to the German people. And just to back up, during World War I, the Germans lost the war and they blamed the Jews and the communists for the loss of the war. So it was, they had to pay reparations. So there was a lot of depression going on there, a lot of social unrest, and they had to find a scapegoat. Communists and the Jews were the two main actors that they were blaming the whole incident of World War I on. And so there was a lot of hatred. A lot of the ideology that Hitler was spewing was to rally the people and to divide the people, to focus on those that created such hardship for the German people. And they were, that's why they went after the Jewish people. They were against communism. In fact, they were against capitalism too. So they rolled over Poland and they rolled over the western part of Europe. And then when they got into Lithuania, my parents were already in an apartment. My sister was 1 year old. And they went down into the apartment, the basement of the apartment building they were in. And in my book, I talk about the German soldiers like goose steps into the city. And obviously the people in the basement realized that the Germans had arrived. Most of the people in there were Jews. And it was very traumatic. So once the Germans arrived, they had to put a Star of David on each person, and they in the back and the front of their lapel and their back, and they wanted to make them stand out. They weren't allowed to walk on the sidewalk. They can't congregate with other people. There was a lot of killing going on by the locals because they believed that the Jews were collaborating with the Russians who had taken over Lithuania in 1940, which they annexed. which was an agreement they made between Hitler and Stalin. It gets to a lot of history. That was called a sphere of influence. Like the Germans would take over the western part of Europe, and the Russians would take over the eastern part, and they agreed that neither one of them were going to go against each other as they annexed their own countries. But what happened was the Germans ended up going halfway through Poland, and then they continued to go because their main goal was to conquer the Soviet Union.
So how was that for, I mean, were neighbor against neighbor at that point as well, it sounds like. I mean, they knew these people, but then all of a sudden are turning on them because of this false information.
Well, this is what happened, Shelley. My mother told me this piece. When the Germans arrived, they would take some of the Lithuanian kind of the higher political people in Lithuania, and they would ask them, where are the Jewish homes in your town? And of course, there was so much animosity because of what the Lithuanians had gone through just a year earlier because of what the Soviets did to them, and they blamed the Jews for collaborating with them. They started pointing out the houses that had all the Jewish people in there. And so the Germans said, well, go home, get your machetes, get your guns, get your knives, get your pipes, go in there and do your thing. And that's one of the reasons why such a large percentage of Jews died in Lithuania. It wasn't only it was not only the Nazis, but it was the Nazi sympathizers. It was the collaborators who sided with the Nazis, thinking if they did a good job that they would be given sovereignty. They were not given sovereignty. They ended up dying with the rest of the Jewish people. So yeah, that's exactly what happened. So a lot of the locals knew where the Jews lived. They went in, and that's how my family got killed up in north of Kaunas in Mažeikiai, Lithuania. My grandparents, my siblings. I'm the last surviving member of my family. My brother died in 2008. That's how my family died. It was not only from the Germans, but a lot of the locals did a lot of the killing.
Wow, I did not know about that, like that side of it and how it was so local.
Thousands.
That's so crazy.
Yeah, it was horrendous. The number of, I mean, in the book, I go into what the locals did. It was they just wanted to just kill. They just had such hatred for the, plus anti-Semitism was not new. I mean, it started in Russia. I mean, the pogroms, the Jews that were being killed for crazy reasons. They didn't fit in. They didn't speak the language. They wore dark clothes. They look at them as the people that killed Christ, which is totally untrue. And they just didn't feel that they were patriotic enough to be part of their country. So this happened like 200 years ago. This was going on. The Jewish people have been prosecuted all through their history, and it's miraculous that there's still a Jewish population left. We're like maybe less than 5% of the world population.
And I know of other people who are Jewish that, I mean, even like in California, they've had anti-Semitism, thrown at them as well, like dangerous stuff, even recently. And it's just crazy that it still goes on.
Yeah, I mean, I get people who are Holocaust deniers. They're saying it never happened.
Wow.
And then I have to explain if they don't have an education. That's the other thing. I'm focusing on the younger people, the high school kids and the college students who I believe don't know that much about what happened during World War II or the Holocaust or what the Holocaust means or who Adolf Hitler was. So when I'm speaking in front of my groups, my focus is getting into the younger generation because they don't really know that much about what happened. And of course, if you don't know, history repeats itself.
Yeah. So, it seems like some of it's repeating itself.
Without a doubt. There's a lot of anti-Semitism now. And that's another reason why, I'm getting emails once in a while saying this never happened. And it's like, read and me. In my book alone will tell you what happened. I mean, there's the photographs, there's documents in there. How could you think it not happen? But that's how some of these groups do it. They want to separate people for their own agenda.
Yes.
They can come in and take over, but they separate people. There's an easier way for them to do that.
Yeah, divide and conquer, right?
Divide and conquer. That's exactly right. That's exactly what Hitler did.
Yeah.
He got the locals to go against the Jews, and they did a lot of the dirty work that also the Nazis did. They gave over to a lot of the locals. And they did this throughout Poland, the Warsaw Ghetto. all the ghettos. A lot of the books out there talk about the concentration camp. I focused on the ghettos because the ghettos, they don't understand. A lot of people don't understand. So many people, so many Jewish people died in the ghettos, even before they got to the camps. So my book focuses on what happened to my parents, and that's how my sister was killed in the ghetto. She was not killed in the concentration camp.
So was she killed through those mobs of neighbors?
No, well, let me go into that a little bit if you don't mind.
Okay.
When
No,
they
please.
ended up being put into the ghetto, what happened, they took 36,000 Jews in the Kaunas proper, put them into a small depressed area of the southern part of Kaunas where about 8,000 people lived. They took 36,000 of the Jewish people who lived in Center City, and they brought them into this area and barbed wired a 3-mile radius around the ghetto, and that's where they stood. And they said they did that. They were using it as a safe zone. They were saying to the people, well, I know a lot of the local Lithuanians are killing a lot of your people. We're going to take you and we're going to put you in a ghetto for your own safety. It was the most ironic. I mean, it was like totally the opposite.
It was it seems like it's a concentration camp. I mean, they were put in this restricted area, right?
Exactly. There wasn't that much difference.
Yeah.
So here they go. My mother and father and my sister ended up going into a 2-bedroom apartment, and there was like maybe 10 or 11, two or three families in there. It was really crowded.
Wow.
And so they couldn't grow their own food. Everything was given to them. They couldn't go outside of the barbed wire fences. Everything was contained inside the ghetto. So there were people who died of starvation.
Yeah.
There were people who died of disease because it was so compact into the area.
Yeah, 36,000 people into an area for 8,000. That's just crazy.
Right. It was unbelievable. So the two things that really distinguished the ghetto in Kaunas was the raids of the Germans going into the apartment buildings and the selection process. Now, the selection process where they would take, unannounced, they would take the Jews, put them in the city square, line them up, and then they were examined by SS officers. To the right, if you were well enough and strong enough, you were to work. To the left, if you were too old or too sick, you were put to death.
Wow.
And so these people are standing in line for hours, each one in a line, stepping up to the SS officer. A lot of them were drunk. A lot of them were on drugs.
The officers.
And so they would get up, they would examine you. They wanted to see your arms. They wanted to look at your face to see if you were healthy. In the book, I talk about my mom and my aunt were in line, and you could imagine some people tried to run away and were shot just getting out of line. Some people fainted right there because they were going up to the judge and their jury, and they're going to be waiting in line to be examined. So my mother turned to my aunt and said, Sarah, pinch your cheeks really hard because it'll give color into your face. And the German officer will think you're really healthy. That's what they did. So my aunt ended up doing that. So my mother got to the front of the line, and the Germans, they just berated. It was just horrible what they did to them. And they knew, they could tell by going to the right, you were going to work. They didn't know where they were going to the left, but they knew that, they could tell they were older people or they were sickly.
Yeah.
And when the group disbanded, they go back into their apartments and their relatives are gone.
Wow. It's so disheartening. I mean,
this was going on for 3.5 years.
Wow.
This wasn't a one-time deal. They would have these unannounced raids. And so it was very traumatic, you can imagine.
Yeah. So and your parents, so when did it happen that your parents were is this the whole time during the war they were in this area, this, mock concentration camp?
I'm sorry. They ended up going into the ghetto in, let me see, it was August of 1941. Then they were, They were shipped to concentration camp in July of 44.
Okay. So they then did have to spend a time in a true concentration camp.
Yeah, almost 8.5, 9 months. So
Wow.
let me tell you the other part of it, which is the
Okay.
raised apartment buildings, which was really unbelievable. So when they had apartment buildings, they were sharing it with other people. They did not know. Well, obviously, they got to know each other, but
Yeah.
so the Germans would have unannounced raids into the apartment buildings. They would just go into the apartment buildings and go into the apartments, and they would take the clothes, the appliances, the money, the jewelry, anything of value. They would just take.
So they
And if
were
you
robbing them.
Exactly. Oh, I see a nice looking saucepan here. I want to bring back to my wife. And they just take things right from the apartment. And if you objected, they would either beat you right there or they would take you away. Now there was an extermination building in outside the ghetto where they exterminated the people. Those people that were taken away when they were in line were not taken to a concentration camp. They were put on a truck and wheeled into an extermination building that used to be a fort when the Russians actually were living there. It was a huge building, and that's where they would exterminate a lot of the people that they didn't want to be around because they just didn't have any use for them. The main thing with the Germans, Shelley, was they wanted them to work them to death. That
Yeah.
was the main goal. We'll work the Jews to death. Work 16, 18 hours a day, a little food, 4 hours sleep, and then you're back in line marching off to your work detail again.
That's incredible. Yeah. And the conditions. I mean, outside of just that, just the living conditions.
It was horrible. So as these raids were going on, and as I said, these were unannounced raids, my father ended up what they call a spider hole. Underneath the floorboard of their apartment in the middle of the night, my mom and my dad built this little spider hole under the ground, and they put some water down there and some different types of products, rations they were getting, scrimmaging around getting food, and they would go down there. Sometimes when the raids came into the house, they would just go down there. They couldn't find them because a lot of them they took away. So while this was going on, as the raids were going on, and this was going on for a number of years, in 1944, March of 1944, the Germans decided this time we're not going after the appliances or the money, we're going after the children.
Oh.
And so in March 27th to 28th, 44, it was called Kindernacht. It was called the Children's Action. The Germans
Children night, isn't that what that means? Kindernacht.
Yeah, the Nacht, yeah. The command from Berlin was to take the children under the age of 12 and then take them out of the apartments and then put them on the truck and then ship them off to the extermination building. And why did they do this? There are a number of reasons. First of all, there was already plans to liquidate the ghetto because the Allies are starting to close in. And they wanted the Jews to work, and they didn't want to disrupt their work that they were given by the war machine. And so they figured if they got rid of the children, the women would be unencumbered about working more diligently without having to raise the children. That was one of the major reasons. Plus, they wanted to get rid of another generation of Jews. So it was those two reasons. So they figured if they got rid of the children, the mothers would be taken away and they could work even harder because they didn't have to be home raising the kids.
That is the tunnel vision is just crazy, just the evil in it, and just so elitist, that thinking they're so great when they're not even seeing the people as people.
No, but there was the German people, the hierarchy of the Germans, which really also is interesting, is that the German culture was very sophisticated. Physicians, they had scientists, people that were brilliant, Freud and a number of, they were just incredible people, cultured people. You would think these people would not follow, I call them sheeple. They just
Yeah.
follow the herd. And they had to have an scapegoat to really feel that they would be able to get back to their nationalism and being the wonderful, the German people, as they are usually known to be, very sophisticated and very well respected.
Well, and then, I mean, Hitler wasn't even from Germany. He was from Austria. And he was, he had this Aryan race that he wanted, but he was dark haired and dark, didn't have the same blue hair or blonde hair that he was wanting. It was interesting that way.
I got to read this to you.
Okay.
Listen to this. Adolf Hitler, the leader of the Nazi Party, argued that the Germans were superior to all other races. Hitler became obsessed with racial purity and used the word Aryan to describe his idea of pure German race, or what he called Herrenwahl. The Aryan race had a duty to control the world. The Nazis believed that the Aryans had the most pure blood of all the people on the earth. The ideal Aryan had pale skin, blonde hair, and blue eyes.
Mm-hmm.
Non-Aryans came to be seen as impure and even evil. Hitler believed that Aryan superiority was being threatened, particularly by the Jews. Therefore, a hierarchy of races was created with the Aryans at the top and the Jews, the Gypsies, and the Black people at the bottom. These inferior people were seen as a threat to the purity and the strength of the German nation. Now get this. The term Aryan originally meant something completely different. Its origin started in the Vedic period of the Indo-Iranian people in India.
Huh.
I mean, where do they get this Aryan thing coming from? So the word was self-designated, an ethnic label that referred to the noble class of the Theravada parts of India. The Nazis, however, linked the word Aryan with the German word Ithra, which means honor, and therefore used Aryan to depict their image of an honorable people.
That is really
I never even
interesting.
knew that until I did my research. This
Yeah.
came from Iran. The word Aryan is not even a German. It's not connected to German.
Yeah, that is interesting.
It's unbelievable. So this was, the research I did was, a lot of this information I got was just mind blowing. So
Yeah.
so what happened was then my sister was, it goes into the book. She was found beneath the floorboard with my mom. It's in the documents too. And so so the Germans found them, and my sister Rose was literally taken out of the arms of my mother, literally.
Yeah.
She got up from the floor with Rose in her arms, and the SS came, and they had a struggle over taking the child. And this is all documented. And so then they walked out the door with my sister, and she's reaching back for my mother's hand, and my mother's running after the two SS officers, and one of the officers turns around and hits my mother in the head with his rifle. She's out cold, and Rose was never seen again. On my father, on the other hand, was in the work detail. He comes home from work and walks into the apartment, and as soon as he walks in, he sees what's going on. He knew, obviously, that Rose was gone.
Yeah.
I mean, it was an incredible chapter. It was the hardest chapter for me to write. When I was doing my research with the Holocaust Museum and the Yad Vashem, the World Remembrance Center in Jerusalem, there was a picture of a little girl by the name of Alina Shatterly. She was born in Kaunas the same time. And her birthday was almost the same day as my sister. She represents 1,600 children who were murdered over a 2-day period in the kindergarten. And when you look at the picture, and I think it's on my Facebook page, and I also think it's on my website.
Okay.
It took me, every time I looked at this innocent face, I literally started to cry. I could not fathom how anyone would want to kill a little 3-year-old girl.
Yeah.
And even to this day, when I see her face, you'll see. I mean, it's just a hard It's a hard chapter to write.
I bet.
Here it is, March 28th, 1944. My sister Rose is taken. 3 months later, Shelley, 3 months, they were now going to be shipped off to the Dachau concentration camp. My father was going with the men in one direction to Dachau. My mother was going into another camp in Stutthof, Poland, in the northern part of Poland along the Baltic. They're on the train platform, and they knew they were being separated. The women and the young children were going with the moms, the women, and then my father and the men and some of the boys were going into the other car. So they were being shipped cars. They didn't really know where they were going. All the Germans said is you were being resettled for your own safety.
Right. And of course, people aren't believing that. I mean, definitely not believing that.
No.
It's crazy they're even saying it.
No, they didn't. They knew they were not going to a good place.
Right.
That I guarantee it. So you get on the boxcar, they get like 200 people in a boxcar that maybe can fit maybe, if at all, 75 to 100. Some of the people in those boxes, there was no air. There was very little ventilation. They had to stand with their hands straight up in the air just to fit them, just to stand
my
like
gosh.
this, because they didn't have any room to move. There was no facilities on the train. It took about 8 hours to get to these locations. When they got there, they opened doors. So many already were dead.
Yeah. Wow.
And so they made a vow, and that's where the book, The Vow, comes in, because on the train platform in July of 44, my parents made a vow that if either one were to live, they were to go back into the city square where they first met 5 years earlier to see if the other one was still alive. Oh,
wow.
That's why they made the vow. And so now the Germans are pushing them in opposite directions to get on the trains. And then they said, they waved to each other and they were off, and they never thought they'd see each other again.
Yeah.
This is only 3 months after my sister was killed.
Wow, Michael. I mean, just so all these traumas right after another, and they have no idea what's in the end of this, separation. Like, are they headed off to their death? Are they, it's amazing all that they would have gone through. And then, then have that hope in each other and seeing each other again, making that vow.
Right. I mean, the fact that the reason why their love was so strong through their marriage, because they not only suffered together as a couple, but they suffered apart as a couple. And they didn't even know. Can you imagine being in a concentration camp, not even knowing if your husband is still alive, and you're trying to stay alive, and your thoughts at night when you're going to bed is, I wonder if, my father's name is David, I wonder if David is still alive. So her mind is, and because the reason people stay alive, because they have a compelling future. They think it's going to be great if we come back together. They just didn't know, but they stayed alive because they felt they had such a strong faith. And that's when I said this, the strength of the human spirit. That's what I leave my audience with. When I say, if my parents had gone through what they went through and they were able to survive, you could imagine if you have a circumstance or hardship that you're facing and you're having a really hard time, if my parents were able to do what they had done, you can do the same thing by having faith and by believing in yourself and having the courage and perseverance to hang in there. Because that's the message they basically left when they left the planet. And so this is a message I leave in my book. It's the strength of the human spirit that will keep you there.
And I, like you said earlier, just keeping their story alive helps us as well. And just that you're going around sharing your parents' story and their power and their faith. It's just amazing. It will help other people to get through their trials and their circumstances. And, things are pretty ugly in the world right now. And a lot of people need that hope and that strength. And I think this is an amazing message to share their story.
My mission is to get this book into as many hands as possible. I know when I leave this planet, I never had children. So this basically is my child, that every library will have my book in the library. I mean, this book, right, as I said, is now going international. I spoke to the BBC, I spoke in Ukraine, I spoke in Australia. This is going around the world. So,
I'm sure it's hard for you. I mean, this is not a light subject, right? This is a very heart-wrenching subject. And for you to be going and sharing, I mean, to have this passion, it's like you said, you're honoring your parents in this way. And what you had no idea when you went to go sell the condo, that this was going to take you on this path. And but what a beautiful thing I'm sure it is for you, even as hard as it is to share it, is probably also uplifting and beautiful to help others in their life.
Well, yes, and plus the fact I really didn't acknowledge them when they were alive. I didn't know how special they were, Shelley.
Yeah.
This I know now, and believe me, they're there. They're with
Yeah.
me. I'm telling you, when I was writing this book and I was on the typewriter in the middle of the night, I had words and images coming into my head. My fingers were racing across the keyboard as if it had a mind of its own.
Wow.
I just sat there and I just was putting everything that they were telling me. Next morning, I would wake up and look what I wrote, and I couldn't believe that I wrote this or they wrote this.
Right. Right.
So,
Yeah.
so one of the reasons I'm doing this is I wanted to show them how much I appreciate what they've given me and how much love they gave me. And this is the least I can do, because I never even acknowledged what they had gone through. They never even spoke about it. And I didn't even realize how incredibly special they were.
Yeah.
And so this is my way of showing them how much I love them.
And I don't want to take a lot from your book, but will you tell us a little bit about how their when they were reunited, how that was when your parents were reunited after the concentration? Yes.
Well, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail because it's going to. I don't want to ruin the book. I mean, it's an incredible chapter, but I will tell you that my father. One of the chapters is called "The Mission." My father was released by the hospital before he should have been, and he traveled through 4 different, it was like almost 4 countries. He was moving into Lithuania, but he traveled for almost, I would say it was about 2.5 months looking for my mom, because after the war, they went into displacement camps. I know what a displacement camp is. These are refugees that had no home to go to, where they didn't want to go back because the Soviet Union was already in those countries. So they would go to these displacement camps all through Europe, wanting to immigrate to Israel, United States, England, South Africa. And so they were waiting to be sponsored by relatives or someone that would take them in. So they would stay at these displacement camps temporarily until they had someone that would sponsor them, and then they would move to that different country. Wow. So my father was traveling. They made out a route as to what displacement camps he was going to go to on his way back to Kaunas, Lithuania. His mission was to get back to Lithuania to find my mom. Yeah. So he ended up stopping at these displacement camp, whether he would be picked up by a GI or take a train or a bus or walk, stopping at these displacement camps looking for my mom, and he couldn't find her on his way back. He finally gets to Białystok, Poland, and he's walking in. I mean, you remember, this is right after the war. All the buildings were blown out. I mean, it was shambles. And he was walking to this displacement camp, and this man was walking down the street with another man talking in Yiddish, which is a form of German and Polish. And my father, when they passed, my father heard a familiar voice. That man turned out to be a neighbor that was right next door. My mother was hit in the head by that German. Oh. He was right next door, and he and his wife picked my mom up off the floor to put her back into her apartment. Wow. His name was Sam. And so my father met him, and Sam actually saw my mom in Białystok. She was going to the infirmary down the street. And of course, when Sam told my father, "I saw your wife today," he totally flipped. You know, so he points, the infirmary, it's down there. It's about a mile down. So he's running down the road to the infirmary. And I don't want to go into a lot of detail, but the way they united was, my mother had typhus fever. She was only hours away from death. She had high fever. And my mother told me this, I mean, when I was still around, she said, when my father found her on the cot with my aunt looking over, because she was only hours away. She had no hair. I mean, she was really sick. Wow. My mother said she opened up her eyes and she saw my dad, and she said, "David, are we in heaven?" Yeah. She thought my father was an angel who came down to take. She never thought she was even alive anymore. Wow. Of course, my father gets, he just totally breaks down and cries. And so does my aunt. And the rest is love conquers all, as they say. And
Yeah.
so my mother had a reason to live now because her husband was still alive. Just incredible.
Michael, thank you so much for sharing your parents' story. It is incredible, and love conquers all, right? Um, and as we have that hope just to move forward, and there are better things on the other side of trials. Sometimes it doesn't seem like it, but as we push and persevere, yeah, that human spirit, as you were saying,
Yeah.
it is incredible.
It really is. People don't realize faith, believing in God or believing in whatever, a higher power, is really important. And it's all inside us. And I always say it's the love you have for yourself that is really important, because we're all part of God. We're all coming from the same place.
Yes.
So anyway, so then they ended up coming to New York, and that's where I was born. And then my father became an electrician, and then my mother became a bookkeeper in a bank. And being raised, and the other part is being raised as a son of Holocaust survivors, it was not easy. My mother was very protective. I mean, she would walk me to school in the morning, first and second grade, while classmates were walking with their friends. My mother was standing at the schoolyard waiting for me to come out of school at 3 o'clock to take me home. Yeah. And so she was very, very protective.
Yeah, she didn't want to lose any more children.
No, she lost her daughter. So I mean, she was very, very cautious about she was not going to lose another child. And they spoke to me in another language. I didn't speak English until I got into the second grade. I spoke Yiddish at home.
Oh, wow.
So, there was a cultural and a generational gap between us. I spoke Yiddish. When I went to school, they didn't know what I was talking about. They didn't, where's this guy coming from? But yeah, so, and they had a tendency of eating very fast. And they had a tendency of buying a lot of toilet paper.
Oh, yeah. A commodity.
Yeah, because
they probably didn't have. Yeah.
No. And every week they'd go shopping, they'd come back with rolls and rolls of toilet paper. I couldn't understand. In the closet, the roll paper from the floor up to the ceiling, and they always kept buying more.
Wow. They missed having that when they were in those other
locations. They didn't have that. That was a luxury. They didn't even have facilities that worked.
Wow.
I mean, when they when they had to go through they had my father. Well, I didn't tell you this. That when he went into Dachau, he was responsible for taking the bodies off the electrical fences of those people in Dachau who were either committing suicide or trying to escape. Wow. He had to go there every day and take the bodies, put them onto a wheelbarrow, and wheel them into the crematorium.
Oh my gosh.
And you can imagine the post-traumatic. My parents had a really hard time. They were pretty much shut down.
Yeah. No wonder why they didn't want to talk about it.
And their emotions were not that demonstrative with their feelings, because they were for them to connect to their real emotions, they would probably never have made it. They had to shut something down.
Yeah.
I don't think any of us would have made it.
Yeah.
Not after that. Loss of their daughter.
So how was it for you growing up then, through that experience of, you didn't know, but you're still living that culture a little bit?
Yeah, it was, well, they wanted me to go to a yeshiva, which is like a Jewish seminary, it was a seminary. But I was an American, and and I'm Jewish, and I followed the holidays, but they wanted me to really practice the faith the way my mother did, rabbi's daughter. And, it was difficult. I mean, she and I had to follow her way, or she would give me the cold shoulder. And so sometimes I had to acquiesce and be the little good Jewish boy she wanted me to be, but it wasn't really me. I had to follow my own path. Yeah. And this what I'm doing now is my way of thanking them for what they've done. But it was not an easy experience for me, especially the other fact that she was very protective. I went away to college, and even then going was not easy, because she had me tied to her apron strings for so long growing up, and I was living in New Jersey, and I was going to college in Ohio. So it was difficult. But then within a year or so, I didn't even want to come home. I wanted to stay out there. But they gave me a lot of love. but it was conditional based on me doing what she wanted me to do. Because, to her, it was like my mother would say to me, if I get married and have a family, they could take her to heaven, because she gauged her motherhood on having a child who had a lot of kids, all raised Jewish, to carry on the tradition. It's obvious. Why not? I'd probably do the same thing. And so it didn't work out that way, but it was not easy. She would tell me before I'd go out to play, don't tell anybody that we're refugees. She didn't want anybody to know they were refugees. Yet their English was so broken, the European Jewish accents, you couldn't help but know that they were from another country.
Right.
And I was like, so yeah, it was. And my brother was the same way. She wasn't so protective of my brother as she was with me being the baby. But
oh yeah,
but it was, it was incredible. And I look at them now through eyes that are just, I admire them so much that you cannot believe that what they had gone through, which I did not know. I mean, every day I thank them for the fact that they gave me life.
Yeah.
And they gave me love. So.
And your life would have been probably a lot different if they had shared their story and you knew more of their story. You would have known more of them and where they were coming from in the decisions that they had been making. I think that goes for any parents, right?
Yeah.
We have our own stories that we don't tell our kids all the time, everything. So
you'll find that very common in children of Holocaust parents. The children don't know, they don't really talk, they don't talk about it.
Yeah.
That's like it's almost like universal. I mean, I meet a lot of children of Holocaust parents, and the parents they never spoke to them about it. They didn't speak to me about it. They just didn't want to reopen the past.
Right.
That's why I didn't go in and start asking them a lot of questions, because it would have and that was one of the reasons it's so hard for them in 1964 to give the testimony to the doctors and the lawyers. They had to go back and recount all this stuff like 10 years later, more than 15 years later. That had to have been very difficult for my parents to have to do that.
And so amazing that your parents kept those documents and that you came upon them.
Yeah. I gave the documents to the Holocaust Museum. They have the documents in their library. I kept a copy of them.
Yeah.
And so, those documents I have, and that's how it got into the book. So you'll be able to read exactly what I sent to the museum.
That's incredible. Well, Michael, this has been so special and amazing to talk to you. And can you please tell the audience where they can get your book, The Vow, and where they can connect with you and the story that you're telling of your parents?
Sure. All right. So my website is The Vow, VOW, The Vow, a lovestory.com. The book cannot be purchased on Amazon or Barnes & Noble or any bookseller. My book is only sold through my website.
Okay.
If you want Kindle, an ebook, you can also order that too. So it'll come directly to your computer. And they could reach me at Michael. It's also on the website, michael@thevowalovestory.com. And I'll communicate with everyone. My Facebook page is blowing up. I mean, I'm getting compliments and emails from all over the world now. I'm from Brazil, they're coming from all over the place. So and so I'll get back. And again, I want to remind people that I also write memoirs for people. So if anybody has a history they want to bring into a book, whether it's themselves or their families, we also do that too.
Awesome. To keep those stories alive. Yeah,
that's exactly what I want. I mean, I'm really into genealogy. That to me is a very interesting topic.
Yes, it's amazing. Thank you so much, Michael. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.